Hey
Hi
everybody.
everybody,
How you doing?
thanks for joining us for another episode of What's Up Watchtower. So today we've decided to discuss something that we've been asked about several times now in the comments on our other videos.
Yep.
And if you've seen our interview on Mike and Kim's channel, then you will have heard part of this story, but we're going to
touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, but we're going to go a little more in depth with our story about how we woke up.
It's a lifelong story, but it won't take a lifetime to watch.
We promise. So I wrote a little outline because you know, it's thinking back over the years and thinking about the pivotal moments in your life and what has brought you to where you are now. And so we're just gonna start with the early years.
Yeah. You know, the first time that you maybe thought to yourself something wasn't right, you know, probably not at an age where you could even put it together what was actually going on in your brain, but you know, something.
And as we've mentioned before, both of us were born and raised as witnesses. Both of our fathers are elders.
Yep.
Yeah. And from a very early age, I would guess that my father probably became an elder when I was about 2 or 3 years old. Yeah, so just thinking about when I was young and some of the teachings that didn't really set well with me at an early age, and 2 things that I could think of right off the top of my head were about the soul. And you'll probably remember the song, "Fear not those who kill the body, but cannot destroy the soul." And that's based on a scripture. I don't remember which one exactly, but either way, it just was very confusing.
Yeah, I had the exact same thought. I even asked my dad about it. When I wasn't such a little kid, I was in my early teen years, and I asked about that. And you know, never really got a satisfactory explanation having to do with the Greek words and translations and this and that. But the song is written in English. It's not exactly quoting a scripture, so they certainly could have done a better job of describing what they were trying to talk about instead of making it so confusing in the way that it was worded.
Yeah. So never got a satisfactory answer to that question.
Nope.
And the second thing I really had trouble with was the scripture that talked about that those who were resurrected would be like angels and they would neither marry nor be given in marriage. And I you know, asked my parents, does this mean the 144,000? And no, if you read it in context, no, it doesn't have to do with them. And I said, well, why would Jehovah put a prohibition upon those whom he resurrected that they could never marry again? And what does it mean that they're going to be like angels? So never could, out of all the research I ever did, I never found anything that was satisfactory as to that.
Elusive explanations.
Yeah, and you know, then they would always, my parents would say, well, we just have to trust in Jehovah and, you know, wait upon him to, you know, give us more information. I guess that would be new light, right?
Right. You know, and it's funny because when you're at that age and or a young teenager or something, you really start putting things together. You're old enough to understand the dynamics of the people in the congregation. You really do understand what they're saying to you, and whether it makes sense or not, that's, you know, completely, you know, up to each individual. But that's, I think, the age when you really start hearing things that are said and going, wait a minute, you know. But certainly as a young child, and we talked about it very briefly before, that there was things that, you know, like for example, our parents, my parents had, we got rid of some toys that we had when we were a kid just so as not to stumble someone else in the congregation, and that didn't sit right with me. Just little things like that that stick in your craw as a child that stay with you, you know. So what other things do you have on there?
So then we did a video about our baptism, and looking back at my baptism and how unhappy I was and didn't really want to get baptized and was so unhappy that day. And you know, we did a whole video about that.
Yeah.
The lovely picture of myself on that morning. And boy, when I came across that picture, I was digitizing all of my father's negatives from, you know, from slide pictures. He used to take pictures and mostly slides, which used to drive my mother crazy. So we have quite the collection of slides, but he wanted me to digitize all of his negatives, so I did. And when I came across that picture, boy, that was like a gold mine. It said, "Oh my gosh, yes, here's proof of how unhappy I was that day."
Yeah.
So anyways, you know, that was early teenage years, and as I got to be, actually it was probably around that year when I got baptized, around 15, started going through depression, but they didn't really pick up on that I was depressed, but I got kind of severely depressed throughout high school and those years. You know, and I couldn't help but think, you know, we're supposed to be the happiest people on earth, and why am I so unhappy? And, you know, then I started to think about how, since Jesus' day, and actually even before Jesus' day, people were preaching the end of the world.
Right.
Yeah, and I kept thinking, you know, if they've been preaching the end of the world since Jesus' day, over 2,000 years now, how do we know we're really in the last days? And, you know, Russell started preaching the last days back in the mid-1800s. So how do we really know that this is the end time? And so then, you know, feeling like I was a good kid, a good person, but felt like everything I wanted in life, all the decisions that I was now being faced with, graduating high school, career choices, wanting to go to college, all of those things were wrong. Everything I wanted to do was wrong. And I just, you know, I couldn't understand why, if this is the truth and we're supposed to be the happiest people on earth, why did everything I want to do, and I felt like I was a good person, was wrong. And, you know, there was a lot of things to do with, you know, being an independent young woman and not understanding this headship arrangement and not understanding why I needed to be in subjection to a man. And that really turned me off from wanting to get married. In fact, when we met, that was one of the first things I told him, that I didn't want to get married.
Yeah, had her all fooled.
Yeah, and really just prior to us meeting and starting to date, I was sort of making an escape plan. I was talking with a non-witness relative that I'm very close to still, and talked to them about moving up to live with them, and I just wanted to fade away and just start over.
Yeah.
And but various things happen, and you know, everything happens for a reason, and then I met you and we started dating, and you know, the rest is history.
Rest is history, as they say.
So then that brings us to, was there anything else you wanted to add about the early years?
Yeah, the early years, you know, as a child, I don't think I paid strict attention to the doctrines that were being taught. You know, you certainly take lessons from the Bible as a child, but you don't necessarily put all of the pieces together. Even as a young teenager, I think more then it's attention span and thinking of going skateboarding after the meeting and other things like that that, you know, are on your mind. And so you're not really focused on the doctrine that's being taught when you're young, because really, I mean, who can sit at, you know, at a young age and listen to a 45-minute public discourse and pay attention to every word? I mean, I would say it's hard for most adults to do the same thing.
Right. Well, and plus we were born into it, so this was all normal to us. This is just was the truth as we were told by our parents.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it just felt like going to the meetings was just a part of life. That's how it always was. That's how it would always be. So the doctrinal stuff I never gave any thought to, but what I did give thought to was what I felt was like constant dissection, and or like the body of elders and people at the hall would constantly be counseling me for having my hair too short, having my sideburns too long, having a suit that's a color that's too bright or too, I don't know. It seemed like...
We're going to actually talk about that kind of stuff in another video.
Yeah, but it was just those type of things within the organization that you see that just lacking a sense of fairness and equality that you kind of pick up as a young person. And again, not thinking of doctrinal things, just getting a feel for people and for how you feel when you're at the meetings and things like that. And, you know, I never really got heavily vested into discovering anything or thinking about anything that I thought was wrong. I just, you know, started picking up on vibes and starting feeling like, you know,
there was hypocrisy that you're starting to see when you start to get a little older and can discern what's happening and what people are doing. But actually, and I just thought of this, that speaking of doctrinal issues, I do remember a circuit overseer, and this was before we were married, definitely. This was when I was a teenager, that came to our hall, and he gave a discourse about how we as witnesses ought to be honoring Jesus more and what Jesus' role. And you remember, because we had the same circuit
I remember this.
Overseer.
Yeah.
And actually, he got in trouble for that. I don't know if you know that, but he got in trouble for that talk.
This brother was very focused on Jesus in his talks, and people who would come to like a public talk when he was there who weren't witnesses would probably think this guy is awesome because he talks about Jesus like many of the ministers. You know, Jesus was a prominent figure in his discussions and talks.
And I thought it was great. I really did. I appreciated, because we really didn't learn a lot about Jesus. It was more, you know, obviously more focused on Jehovah. And I thought it was great. And I remember talking with my parents about it, and I could tell they were a little uncomfortable with it. Yeah, there was some discomfort there, but I said, but he's right, you know, he created the universe according to the Bible, that God created him, and then he created everything else. Everything else came through him, and that he is the king of the kingdom, and everything has been subjected to him, and you know. So anyways, it was, I just remembered that, and that was a doctrinal thing that I did sort of have an issue with, that the witnesses didn't give enough credit to Jesus, really. So anyways, so now that brings us to when we got married. And the first 5 years of our marriage. We're kind of breaking this down to in segments and some of the highlights of those periods of time. Yeah, so it was very challenging after we got married, because we were, you know, so young and just trying to, you know, find our way. And, you know, now our parents weren't going to make us go to the meetings.
Right, exactly. You're free, you're on your own, making your choices for yourself.
Yeah, and within the first couple of years, I fell into a very deep depression. And his congregation, which he didn't really know any different because he was raised in that congregation, was extremely cold and unfriendly and judgmental.
Yeah. And
I had a really hard time being in that congregation. And in fact, my father reached out to a pioneer in our hall who was someone that knew us very well, and explained, you know, what I was going through, and that could she please just take me in field service or take me on Bible studies, more on Bible studies, because it was really hard for me to do any witnessing at that point. And, oh, sure. That didn't happen. No. I didn't know that he had that conversation until years later. He told me. Yeah. And I said, no, never reached out to me to help me at all. And the last, well, backing up, he actually was going to the meetings for about a year almost without me.
Right.
Probably about a year. And I was starting to question everything.
Yeah, and at that point, I was still very heavily indoctrinated, I would say. I felt like it was my obligation to continue to go to the meetings, even more so now that Robin wasn't really going, which...
That he had to represent our family.
I had to represent, exactly. You know, and that puts a lot of pressure on a young guy, you know, 21, 22 years old, never lived alone, which is, you know, I think what happens to a lot of young people who are witnesses who get married. They never have a chance to, or they never take the opportunity to live on their own and experience life by themselves. Usually they end up just going from living with mom and dad and getting married and getting a place with their wife, and that's it. And so that learning to kind of be an independent person is probably something that witnesses lack, you know, because they are not having the opportunity to develop as an individual person simply because they're so tightly in the mold of the organization. And then if you get married, you're thrust into a mold of headship, of being a husband, of being a spiritual head to your household. And it's not just now the responsibility of work, it's the responsibility that God is putting on your head to make sure that you study the Bible with your wife like she needs it, and, you know, and she's smart, she knows what's up. And, you know, it's just like all of this new responsibility as a young person puts an incredible amount of pressure on people. I mean, just absolutely constant.
So he was quite concerned about me for some of the things that I was saying, that I was starting to question beliefs. And he invited a couple of elders to come over for a shepherding call.
I cannot believe I did that.
And yeah, so I mean, I think I shocked the pants off of you when I said, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore.
Yeah, although one of the elders that was there, he didn't even seem to flinch by it.
No.
He didn't flinch.
It was like he heard that every day.
Yeah.
Maybe he did.
And I didn't know what to think of it at the time. I certainly didn't ever think that I wouldn't be a Jehovah's Witness. The thought had never even crossed my mind before. And
until then, for me.
Yeah, and that was surprising for me too, because I'm thinking, oh man, am I going to be married to a person who's an unbeliever? You know, and then you've got those kind of stresses, you know. It's a lot to have on your plate at a young age.
And then we were also being encouraged by a circuit overseer and his wife to quit our full-time jobs, find part-time work to support us in the full-time pioneer work.
Yeah. And what I think it's just interesting that at the time, you know, this particular brother was born in the truth, sorry about that. Sorry everybody on YouTube. When I say truth, just imagine air quotes next to it.
It still slips out.
It's a habit I am having such a hard time breaking. I've seen plenty of comments about it. Don't keep calling it the truth. But now if that slips out again, just imagine little air quotes next to it. So, you know, this person was born into the organization, parents were in the organization, grew up in the organization, went to Bethel, got married, and when he got married, went into the circuit overseer work. And that's been their life. And I don't know exactly what the arrangements for circuit overseers are now, but, you know, sure, these guys aren't making a ton of money. You know, they're not making hardly anything, but they have a car that's paid for, they've got health insurance, their meals and food are covered. They really live a life of dedication, and all their expenses are completely covered. And I was thinking, you know, if this is all you're going to do, it really is a cakewalk. I mean, you don't have to be up on a roof. You're not swinging a hammer. And a lot of these people who are making these suggestions...
Not worried about how you're going to pay your bills.
Yeah, you know, we actually, you know, we have a place that we live that we have to pay for, and a car that has to be paid for. And unlike you, you know, the organization pays all of your expenses. How am I going to swing that? Bethel isn't writing me a check every month. You know, so it was some difficult things. Like, it just made me realize that the people who were in the organization who are up at the top or in high levels were out of touch with the regular person in the congregation.
Right.
That they would say to you, you should think about having a part-time job in pioneering. Well, that just doesn't apply to most people. And in the United States where we are, I mean, maybe it's different than in other countries, but you know, everything is like work, work, work here. And it's sometimes hard to make it by. It's hard to scrape a living, you know, for a lot of people. So quitting your job to try and pioneer is really putting your family in detriment.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, his congregation was absolutely miserable for me. And I remember the last time we went to that hall. And literally on the way to the meeting, I was crying and I was saying, you know, we're supposed to be, the way that this organization is supposed to be is that you will know them by the love they have amongst themselves. And that is what Jesus said, and you always see that in the literature. That's why we know we have the truth. We know that we are Jehovah's people because look at the love that we have amongst ourselves. And wouldn't you know that that public talk was on that very subject?
No way.
Yes way. And I just kept looking at you and I was sobbing and I was like, this is just so ironic.
Yeah.
And well, then the song came up and he said, you want to go? I said, yes. And so we bolted out the door. Well, there was 2 elders doing parking lot duties, and I mean, I was, you know, a mess, and they just looked at us and said, have a nice night.
Keep warm and well fed.
And I said, I'm never going back there.
Yeah.
And you said, okay.
And it's when you're in situations like that too, you really realize how people treat you, how involved they want to get with your problems. You know, hey, everybody's got problems, but these men are in a position of responsibility put there to shepherd the flock. And
by the way, they knew about my depression. Those elders that you know, that looked at me and just said, have a good night, they knew about they knew about my depression. They knew about the problems that I had been experiencing since, you know, we had been married.
yeah.
So either way, we decided to switch to another congregation, and that was a very nice hall. A lot of nice people, young couples.
The one thing I felt was the main difference, and because I had always been going to the first congregation, I never really realized I visited a lot of other congregations, but to go to another congregation on a regular basis and be a member of that congregation was different to me. And I really realized what a difference it was between the people at our old hall and the people at the new hall, because the people at the old hall seemed fake. It was real gossipy. I didn't feel bad about leaving. I didn't have any real friends there. You know, the people that I was friends with had long since moved on, gotten married, gone to another congregation or whatever. So I felt no connection there. And the people in the new hall, I actually felt that they were a very kind, very caring, very loving group of people. It was a really good mix of races and ages, and I actually thought it was a really nice hall.
It was a very nice hall, and it helped to restore my belief in humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or in the organization, I could say.
Yeah.
So, started to get spiritually stronger. And, but, after a couple of years, I really missed the congregation that I had been raised in. And my entire family, well, most of my family went there. And so we made the decision that we would start going to that congregation. And again, it was, especially in the beginning, everybody was so happy to see us, so happy that we were back in that hall.
And just as a side note, as a small child, when I was born, that's the congregation that my parents went to. So when I went back to her congregation, the congregation her parents went to, I knew people there from when I was a kid, older sisters who used to babysit me and things like that. So it wasn't a strange place for me either. I knew people there as well, and I had some like long-term connections there through family and stuff. And those people, you know, those long-term connections were nice people.
Yeah. So starting to become, you know, more active in the congregation and getting, you know, my faith sort of restored was good for me. But I still struggled with depression during that time. But I started to do a lot more Bible study, and I made it a goal to read the entire Bible from cover to cover. And so I was able to do that in about a year's time.
What kind of time frame is this? What year do you think this was?
Oh, this had to have been in the early 2000s. Yeah. So I just kind of dedicated myself to reading 3 chapters a day, which will get you through the Bible in about a year. And there were so many questions I had, but I decided, nope, let me just read it from cover to cover so that I can say I've done it, and then I'm going to start over, which is what I did. So I started over, and I decided, okay, this time I'm going to take it slow, nice and slow.
Pace yourself.
Pace myself. And any questions I have, I'm going to research as much as I can. And so then, when so I really heavily researched, and I even made an outline of all the kings of Jerusalem and Judah, and when they reigned, and if they were good or if they were bad, and you know, all the little kind of high points about what happened during their reign. And it really got me disturbed. Yeah. Reading the Bible disturbed me, very much so, because especially when you came to the part about the Israelites and the crimes against humanity, really, that they committed. And not only was it condoned by God, but he admonished them to do these things. And he was complicit in the mass genocide of nations that occurred. And that it was completely condoned. And that the men would take the young maidens from the nations that they had conquered, or in other words, young virgin women, and would keep them for themselves. And we all know what that means if you really sit and think about it.
I don't think they were used for personal chefs or anything like that, you know, back then. No.
They weren't just cleaning. So that was very upsetting to me, and I could not find information that made that okay. There was just nothing that could, you know, that it was just very upsetting to me. And then reading about, you know, Lot with his daughters and all of that disgusting stuff. Sorry, but it's very troubling to read. And, you know, no matter what the society would write about that, I couldn't, you know, I just couldn't be okay with it.
There's a lot of stories that are in the Bible that if you just look at them at their page, like read it for what's right on the page, is very, very disturbing stuff. Yeah. Extremely disturbing stuff that we would never sanction in today's world.
No. And, you know, anyways, so around the early 2000s, I can't remember exact year, but the book Draw Close to Jehovah came out. And I made some notes about my reactions to that book. And this is what really started the waking up process for me. It had the exact opposite effect of what it was meant to have. I never really thought about my mortality until after reading that book. And I started to think about that if God has existed for eternity, how do we know that he hasn't done this millions of times before? Because humans were only created 7,000 years ago. So what was he doing all that time before? And how do we know he's not going to do this again? What game is at hand? What game is he playing? So then I started to think, okay, if he's existed for eternity, and what would it matter if Satan challenged his universal sovereignty? He is the universal sovereign, according to the Bible. And it was around that time when in the U.S., the election of 2000 between Gore and Bush, and the popular vote voted for Al Gore to be president. However, the Electoral College voted for Bush. So it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And once the Supreme Court made the decision to elect Bush, that was it.
End of the line.
End of the line. They were the highest echelon, the final decision. So I'm like, if they can make that decision and they don't have to answer to anybody, then why would Jehovah have to answer to Satan as far as his universal sovereignty? It's like, it was circular reasoning. None of it would add up in my mind. So I finished the book. It was an afternoon, and I quickly opened a bottle of wine.
Yep.
He called me, and I was crying, and I said, "I'm drunk."
That was an unusual phone call.
Yeah.
Yep, didn't expect that one.
No, he was at work, and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I just finished the Draw Close to Jehovah book."
Yeah.
And I couldn't really put it into words and explain to him why it was so upsetting for me. But it just started the process of really thinking about the doctrines and the teachings, and them just not making sense to me anymore. So all of that happened, and then, then we had September 11th.
Right.
So as witnesses, there was a lot of talk amongst the witnesses that maybe this was the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Did you think that too?
I certainly saw it as something that I knew from the instant it happened that this would stand out in my mind for the rest of my life, that this is an important moment in history. I certainly know that some of the older people in the congregation were talking about the end times and the signs that we would be seeing, and that, yeah, there were whispers of Armageddon, but I don't necessarily feel like I believed it at all. I mean, at that time, 2001, I would say, I mean, I was still going to the meetings and stuff, but not, boy, I was really just kind of checked out. I was just kind of a body in the seats, so I don't think that's what I thought personally, but I definitely remember that being the biggest deal in my life up to that point, as far as world events that were happening that I witnessed and saw. So yeah, it was a huge event, and I definitely remember people talking about it.
Yeah, and the witnesses love to talk about, always quote the scripture about the signs of the last days when Jesus' disciples asked him. And I started breaking down those signs, and I love history. I love studying history. I love watching shows on the History Channel about, all different, the Romans and the Greeks, and, and I started thinking about those signs and thinking, our civilization today is actually less violent than the civilizations that have come before us.
Yeah, to a great, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like thinking those signs about, and people being, the way that people would be, I'm like, I don't know. It seems like we aren't quite as violent as some of the other civilizations that I've read about. So how would that mean that we're living in the last days? So that was just a thought that just came to my mind. I wasn't going to talk about that, but sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and about that time too, you're speaking about waking up. I mean, being that I wasn't necessarily so researched in doctrine and stuff, I wasn't looking for problems. I was just kind of going with the flow. But what hung me up was the actual brothers themselves, as a person who's just, trying to make the meetings, trying to do your best, even though your best isn't as good as somebody else's or whatever. And that's the other thing. You're always made to feel that whatever you do, you could be doing more. Somebody else is doing more than you. I don't know why you can't do more. And it's never said so bluntly like that, but certainly the intention is there. But you know, the brothers, it's like, man, just not appreciating at all the effort that goes into being at all the meetings and taking care of your family responsibilities. Sure, they've got this stuff too, but these are the bosses of the congregation. I mean, they are the guys who are supposed to be setting the lead, and I'm just a young guy trying to get things figured out. So the constant scrutiny was like more than I wanted to deal with. It was just too much. And it came to a head as far as dealing with the elders. You never had problems with the elders, but I certainly realized that they didn't necessarily care about me as a person. They just wanted me to do what they said. And that really came to a head when and we go into this a little bit more in the interview with Mike and Kim, and I'm going to just keep it really brief, but I had been playing paintball for years, playing competition paintball. Elders told me to stop playing paintball and directed me to an article, and I think the 1989 Awake, I think it's August or something, it's called Bang Bang You're Dead. If you feel like looking it up, somebody posted a link under one of our comments in our videos. So either way, my basic issue was that the article the brother gave me to look at, I did my research, I read the article diligently, I decided to like really take it seriously what he said, and everything in the article was wrong. And so I did counter research. They were saying it's unsafe, so I did, I printed out a bunch of statistics from the National Data Safety Board. God, I can never remember to say that right. And either way, basically, it refuted every single thing that the article said. So I was basically going to say, well, everything you gave me is wrong. This is the facts about the matter, so why can't I keep doing this? What's the problem? But it never got that far because they didn't want to talk to me. The minute it was all about do what I say, end of discussion. And I just don't work like that. I just can't do it. And after having lived my whole life that way and getting very little explanation for the things you're doing or why you're directed to do things certain ways, it just got to be too much. And so I just completely quit going to the meetings. I just said, I'm not going back. I'm not dealing with the elders. I'm not dealing with the organization. I'm not dealing with the brothers. I'm not handling this responsibility. It's a thankless group of people who only want you to follow and scrutinize everything you do that doesn't line up with what they want you to do. And I just wasn't having it anymore,
Yeah, and probably just prior to that, because it was within a couple of years of September 11th happening, I started getting very curious, because we sort of living in the West over here, didn't hear a lot about what Muslims believe. And, of course, these were extremist, fundamentalist Muslims. We understand that. We don't group them all together. But I started to think, well, if they believe this so passionately, that they're willing to die in this way and kill all these people, they must really believe they have the truth.
Yeah.
And so that led me to start researching other religions. Outside of the Watchtower publications, I started researching other religions, Mormons and things, and realized these people believe what they believe as strongly as what we believe. They believe they have the truth.
I think it's funny that most witnesses don't seem to grasp that concept, that a person who says they're a Catholic, in most cases, they're a Catholic because they believe what the Catholics teach, and that is their faith, and that is what they believe, whether they were born into a family who believed that, or whether they converted or whatever. No matter what religion, no one would belong to any religion unless they thought it was the right one. So it's just really funny that the witnesses will say, we have the right religion, but every religious person thinks they have the right religion.
Yeah.
And to them, it's really their right religion.
And they're willing to die for it.
Yeah.
So, I just really started to think about that. And how do we know we have the truth if these people believe they have the truth as much as we do? And I think, because I was still going to meetings without him and for about a year. And So we took turns there.
Yeah.
He did it earlier in our marriage. I did it later.
Yep.
And yeah, so at that time, I started to think about, I really wanted to get my degree, and I had been taking classes here and there at our local community college, and so I decided, all right, you know, this was prior to me going to school for fashion design, but I thought, all right, I'm just going to focus on getting my associates in just something generic like business, you know, or something like that. So I decided to sort of buckle down and take my all of the rest of my general education classes. And I ended up having a science class called environmental conservation. And I think that it just, everything sort of lined up, that it was just the right time. You know, there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, literally, the teacher appeared.
And he was a teacher.
Yes, and he was one of my professors. And I think I had just finally gotten to a point where I opened myself up to really listen to what was being taught about natural selection and the process of evolution. And it just made sense to me. It just completely made sense in a way that I never expected. And it actually answered, you know, a lot of the questions that I had about, you know, not really believing about the flood of Noah, and how did all those animals in Australia get there, and they're so different from animals in the rest of the world, and why are they so different if, you know, all the animals had to migrate after the flood, you know?
Yeah.
So anyways, that's a completely another subject, and we might be making a video about sort of those things in the future. But yeah, I was really, it opened me up, and you know, I was still very depressed, and around that time I was suffering panic attacks. Hardly one meeting would go by without me having a panic attack, and it got to the point so much so that for a little while I even found it very hard to leave the house. So you know, I continued to take classes and open up my mind to thinking in a different way, and it finally got to a point where I just decided, and let me just say, I did not read one apostate book. I did not look at one apostate website.
Yeah.
I came to this conclusion on my own, and I just realized I can't believe in this. He wasn't coming to the meetings with me anymore, so I knew I wouldn't have to explain to him like why I wasn't going to be going to meetings anymore. But I would just sit at the meeting, and I'd be next to a friend, and a brother would say something completely ridiculous, unscientific, and I would just roll my eyes, and I caught myself almost nudging her, saying, "Can you believe what he just said?"
Yeah, that's not me sitting next to you. You might not want to do that.
Right? And I was like, they're going to see me. They're going to find me out. They're going to see me rolling my eyes. Again, I'm going to get caught rolling my eyes.
Back room, please, sister. Back room.
And I just couldn't do it anymore. I felt sick every time I went to the meetings. I literally felt sick. And I just couldn't believe in it anymore. And so I told you, I can't do this anymore, you know, and I know you're not doing it, so why should I keep doing it? And so I made the decision not to go anymore. How did you feel about that?
To be honest, because I was still super checked out of anything involving Jehovah's Witnesses at that point, I was like, okay, whatever. You know, it didn't affect me one way or the other. I still think that a part of me always felt like that was gonna be in my life at some point, that maybe in time I would get something figured out and I'd go back to the meetings or whatever, but I never really thought I was gonna be out, you know, never. I just wasn't going at that time.
It's interesting because at that point, I knew that I made that decision, and I knew that I was never going back.
Right, right. Well, part of my issue in dealing, as I said, you know, the brothers is just constant dealing with the brothers. But then I recognized a lot of hypocrisy there, especially when there are brothers who are older, much older brothers who were not raised in the truth, and they're telling you how to live every little portion of your life, and yet they had the freedom to live their life any way they wanted to, and in their 30s or 40s or 50s became a Jehovah's Witness. So I found that really disturbing, that another grown person was limiting my free choices in life when they themselves had all the freedom in the world to do anything they wanted, and now they're coming back and telling people what to do. It just is super, super hypocritical to me. And the hypocrisy in the congregations, in the religion itself, is so overwhelming in the places that I've been and stuff that I've seen, that it just completely, it turned me off to the religion, it turned me off to the Bible, it turned me off to God, it turned me off to faith, it turned me off to everything having to do with God, religion, spirituality. As far as I was concerned, that stuff was all fake.
Yeah, but it's not just the witnesses. We're going to set that caveat. It's not just the witnesses that are hypocritical.
No, I completely understand that, but this is just where I was at that time. This is just my mindset. I was angry, frustrated with the brothers, you know, and not just one person. I mean, as a whole, everything that was happening. And it's not like you can put in an anonymous complaint in a box and somebody will see it and take care of a problem. You can't tell them you think they're doing something wrong. You can't tell them that you disagree with what they're telling you. I mean, you're looking for a judicial committee.
Yeah.
So really the only choice you have is to either continue to go and hold your tongue, or just decide not to put yourself in that situation that makes you feel bad, and just don't go. And that's where I was at.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it was after that I felt like, all right, you know, I am free. You know, I was going through a lot. I mean, I cried a lot during those years, but I realized, okay, I'm free now to start researching things that I would not have before. That would have been considered apostate, but I don't have to answer to anybody. I'm free to go and look. And, but I'd already made up my mind, you know, regardless, that I didn't believe it was the truth. So I start, you know, you hear things through the years, oh, that's apostate thinking. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to start researching. Why is that apostate? What is so scary and wrong about learning about this stuff? And, you know, I went on to an apostate
one of the forums or something.
And you know, I found comfort there. I really did, because I didn't comment on anybody's comments. I was just sort of observing and reading what people were saying and what other people's stories were. And especially on a Thursday night when I felt like, oh, you know, I miss my family, I miss my friends, I sort of want to, you know, I would love to go back, but I would go on that forum and it gave me comfort to see what other people were going through.
Those are other people that didn't want to be at the meeting.
Yeah. So I mentioned it to him, some of the things that I was learning. And what was your reaction?
I still had like a visceral reaction to it. I was not happy about it. I don't even know if I could put my finger on why, except the fact that you're indoctrinated to think evil, bad, Satan, devil, hell, you know, whatever bad things you could think of. That's apostate equals all the worst things that you could think of. So regardless of the truth behind that or not, that was my initial gut reaction, just like, oh, bad stuff, bad stuff.
He said, why are you reading that stuff? Why are you reading apostate literature?
And we weren't going to the meetings anyway.
Yeah, it'd been a couple of years.
So it didn't really matter, but I still had that thinking.
Very strong reaction to it, and I realized, okay, I just can't say anything about this to him. I need to just keep it to myself because he's not ready to listen.
I wasn't at the point where I was willing to say that this is not the truth. I was just at the point where I was saying, I can't be a part of this organization right now because it's more grief than good, you know? So I had stepped back for that reason. But then it was, I kind of like stayed in that mindset for a few years. And then we had a chance to go to Egypt in 2007.
Yeah.
We went to Egypt for a couple of weeks. It was an awesome, awesome trip. One of the greatest trips of our life. And it was after we got back from Egypt, I mean, I just fell in love with the architecture and the artwork and just everything about it. I loved it so much. So I started doing a lot of research in the library, that would be like the reference section, you know, like art books, historical art books, and things like that. And just through flipping through some of these big reference books about artwork and the time periods of the Byzantine Empire and just all these different things, I just came across the destruction of Jerusalem. What does that say?
What does it say?
586? That's not 607. 586.
Yeah.
And so I immediately was like, hold on. I'm gonna put this book down. Let's go get another book. Look at it. Jerusalem was destroyed in 586. So that's not 607. So that means if we follow the prophecy with the day for a year, add the 2, carry the 1. Wait a minute, that means 1914's not right. So
you showed that to me, and I said, yeah, I already know that.
Yeah, she probably couldn't have spoken to me openly about it anyway because I wasn't really ready to hear that kind of a thing. I just kind of have to discover it for yourself, you know? So that was it though. I discovered that Jerusalem wasn't destroyed in 607, that the linking chain from 607 all the way through modern day prophecy is wrong. All of it's wrong. And it was at that point that I felt free from the religion. I could at that point say, I no longer believe this. I was always raised, my dad used this kind of a, I don't want to say it was a tactic, but in service, he would talk to people at the door and basically say, you know, if there was one thing wrong with your religion, doesn't that mean that your whole religion is wrong? If it's based on things and something is wrong with one of the teachings or whatever, doesn't that mean that basically everything is wrong? And so that was my first thought when I discovered that 607 was wrong. I basically just accepted, like lightning struck me, and I realized it's all lies, wrong.
It broke you open.
I was just like, it was just like somebody turned on a light switch. And then at that point, you know, after doing some secular research, because even to this day, I have yet to crack open an apostate piece of literature. I have yet to crack open an us piece of literature. You know, but I
watched plenty of videos.
I have watched a lot of videos in the last year, yeah. But you know, it didn't take that from me. I didn't need that kind of outside sourcing to understand that it wasn't true. I had grown up in it. I knew the doctrines. I knew everything that was happening. And once I could just, for a fact, like factually backed by fact, it's wrong. And that's all it would take to disprove the entire religion to me.
Yeah. So I really had no fear of Armageddon anymore. Like I hear some people have nightmares about Armageddon. I have more nightmares that I'm stuck at a convention. I'm back at an assembly and listening to all that stuff. Those are my nightmares, trying to get out of a convention or a Kingdom Hall. But yeah, I had no fear, and you know, my feeling has been that, you know, some people say, well, when they observe, you know, something happens in the world and it kind of makes them think, oh, what if the witnesses are right? What if we are living in the end times? My feeling is if God exists, first of all, and if he knows me better than I know myself, then he's gonna understand why I had all these doubts. He's gonna see right through to my heart and know that I was not unfounded in my my beliefs and the things that I was having trouble with believing. and that he would, if he's a just God, then he's not going to destroy me. And if he's not a just God in that sense, then that's not a God I would want to worship anyway.
Right. And, you know, something I always think about is, you know, as a Jehovah's Witness, you were raised, and current Jehovah's Witnesses are still taught this, to accept what the governing body says, regardless of whether it makes sense from a human standpoint or not. And I just don't understand, like, there's the example of doubting Thomas in the Bible. You know, he says, I don't know about this whole Jesus being raised from the dead thing. And so what happened? Jesus showed him the wounds in his hand and let him touch the wound in his side. He gave him proof. You know, Jesus didn't say, you're just going to have to take my word for it. You're really going to have to take my word for it. No, when it was a legitimate thing, somebody had a legitimate question, he offered proof.
Right.
You know, and that is the one thing as a Jehovah's Witness, you cannot go to the elders and say, let's have some proof about the overlapping generations. You know, there is no proof. They ask you just to accept what this group of men says, regardless of whether it makes sense from a human standpoint or not. And that just doesn't fly with me.
No. And you're also told to make the truth your own and to prove it to yourself. And I've proved it to myself.
Disproved it to yourself.
I've proved it to myself that it's not the truth.
Yeah.
So
as we mentioned in one of our other videos, where after learning what we know to be fact, I mean, facts that can be checked and be shown to be true, we're not afraid anymore.
Right.
We're not under any kind of shadow of that organization any longer. I suppose only in name that we haven't been officially disfellowshipped or something yet, but you know, that's one of those things that may or may not happen. Who knows how that's going to work out. But yeah, that organization is...
They have no power here.
You shall not pass.
All right, so I hope that you have found this interesting. I know a lot of you have asked about how we woke up, and you know, it's kind of a long story, but you know, that's how life is. You know, it's full of twists and turns and pivotal moments that happen in your life, and then when you look back, you can see that all of those things have led you to where you are today. And we're very happy. We're happier than we've ever been, and we feel free.
We are not only happy and not only free, but we're doing better than we've ever done before.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating a milestone today.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in our next video.
Bam! See you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks.